Good morning today, class. Today we're going to start covering the coffee table project. Specifically, we're going to cover the process of creating the legs for the coffee table, seeing this has the most amount of steps and a lot of milling and other parts that are really crucial to pay attention to. So what we're going to start with is the most important step, which is milling the board. All right. Now, when you go into the wood room, you normally find a board that looks like this. All right. It's rough on both sides, probably doesn't have a good edge, and it's probably not square. So the very first step is you're going to surface or plane both faces of the board, the larger sides, until they're perfectly parallel with each other and they're flat and clean. All right. Reason why is that is we need it to make a nice flat gluing surface when we start to make our legs together. All right. Now, if you notice, if you look at the end of the grain of the board and it starts to make a C shape or what we call a cup, all right, you're going to put the arc facing up towards the planer blades. Now, the reason why we don't put it the opposite way is if I plane it that way, it could rock over onto a side and plane it at an angle, and then you start wasting material trying to fix that shape. So instead, we always put the arc facing up as we plane down our boards. All right. So once we've done that, we can start working our 6 steps of squaring a board. All right. So if we refer to the 6 steps of squaring a board, the very first step would be crosscut to rough length. All right. So if our legs are normally 16 inches, they're probably going to be 16 and a half when we cut them rough. That's the equation. Final length plus a half an inch. All right. So you would crosscut your pieces to 16 and a half. All right. Then you would go to step 2, which is to go to the jointer and joint the better edge. So you inspect your board. All right. The board that has the best edge is the one that gets jointed. So if we look at this board here, obviously this is the worst edge. So this is the edge that we would joint, and then we would rip a piece out of that until we could remove the bad side. All right. Step number 3 is ripping. All right. So we're going to rip this to rough width. All right. Rough width is the dimension that we want to end at, or our final width. So in this case, it would be 3 inches. And then we add 1/8 inch. Why 1/8 of an inch? Is because our jointers take off exactly 1/8 of an inch. All right. So I would take this to the table saw, rip with the grain. All right. Then I would go to the jointer, which is step 4. All right. After step 4, I'm going to square the ends. All right. So I have my edges and my faces parallel. Squaring, what it does is it makes sure that the end grain is perpendicular to both the edges and the face. This is important because if I don't have it square, it's not going to stand straight when we go to use it. So with that said, squaring on step 5 is you're going to take off of exactly 1/4 of an inch. All right. Then I go to the opposite side. Now this is where it changes. If there is 1/4 inch left of material that you can take, you may take off 1/4 of an inch. Or you take off exactly what you need to get to 16 on center. Now 16 isn't the actual measurement that you have to stay strictly to. If you want to make your table taller or shorter, that's okay, but you have to keep in mind that the measurement has to be the same for all the pieces that you're cutting for your legs. All right. So once I have cut my legs, all right, then I can move on to the glue up step. Now, when I do the glue up, I'm going to use a hand screw, which is this tool here. All right. Now, what's important is using a hand screw, you need to make sure that both sides are parallel to each other. If they are, say, close like this, all right, I'm not getting the full clamping pressure that I can for the project. All right. So when I'm clamping my leg, I want to be able to put equal pressure from the top of the edge to the bottom of the edge all the way through my workpiece. All right. With that said, when I am clamping my pieces, this is an example where someone did not follow this. I want to make sure at least one edge is completely flat. So when I lay my glue boards down on the carpet when I'm gluing it, I want to make sure they're as close to flat as possible before I start to take my hand screws and clamp them together. All right, so I start to tighten my hand screw down, so I'm going to get it a little closer. All right, once I clamp it down, all right, I want to inspect to make sure that the gaps are all closed. A good example of seeing that is you should see a little bead of glue squeeze out or come out of the crack itself just above where you're clamping. All right. You should also inspect the opposite side once you've gotten all your clamps on. So once I've got my hand screws all the way down here, I flip it over, and in the space between those hand screws, I'll place an additional hand screw. Reason why is I want to put opposing forces on this to ensure that it is a nice square cleanup. If I don't do this, and I go to the lathe or I go to cut my cabriola legs, it's possible the legs can delaminate or break apart, and I don't want that. All right, so from there, 24 hours later, I get my glue block. Now, if it's not perfectly square, that's okay. We're going to use the squaring the leg steps, which are listed in your worksheet. You're going to go to the jointer, and you're going to put the face of this flat against the jointer, not the bottom. All right, that's the key part. If I want to make this flat in the bottom, I'm going to put this flat against the fence. And what it will do is, after each pass, it will remove enough material to create a flat surface. Then from there, if there's a small amount, what I can do is I can run it through the planer to plane away that extra material. All right? If it's a lot of material, I'm going to have you hand plane it down with a bench plane, and then you can plane away the rest. All right? But your goal is that the the thickness and the width need to be exactly the same. In the plans, it states for a 2 3/4 by 2 3/4 wide piece. So again, they should be almost exactly the same. There should not be 1/16, 1/4, or any measurement larger in those measurements. Then it makes it a lot harder for us to, first off, lathe it, and second off, cut it on the taper or cut our cabriola legs. All right. Now, the type of gluing we did here, just a side note, is it's a butt joint, but what we did was we face glued. So we glued the face of each board together to increase the thickness, whereas if I were to glue it together on the edges, that would create what we call a panel, which increases the width. All right, just a side note on that. Also, you are free to glue multiple different species together to create one blank. You're not straddled to any specific wood for each part. So if you want to do a 3-tone or a 2-tone color for your legs, it is up to you as the designer. You just need to note it in your plans and to let me know as the instructor what you're doing with that. All right. From there, we're going to deviate to the legs, the turned legs specifically. If you're doing cabriola or tapered, the only step that you're going to do before those measures is you're going to cut the grooves, which we're going to cover over at the router. So when I am cutting my design on my leg, I first need to lay out where the top of my leg is and my support part is on my leg. So what we're going to do is we're just going to look in the back of the room. I have a block laid out, and we're going to roll from there. As we're talking about laying out our turned legs, I want you to refer to page 5 of your plans. Here is a detailed drawing of how you're going to lay out each part of your leg. For the top, and you need a 5-inch long square, and then below that you have your turned part, and then below that is your square, and then the bottom is the ball or the foot of your piece. All right. Now you notice that I drew the lines along all 4 sides of the wood. Reason why I did that is while this is spinning, all right, you can kind of see it here. You can see the lines that break up each part, and it gives you a good layout of where you're going to be making your cuts. All right. Now, the reason why the 5-inch top square and this square here are so important is that we need perfectly flat surfaces to attach our tongue and groove and our blind mortise attendants on the bottom. These 2 parts cannot be turned round. They can have a slight taper or a light edge on them, but they cannot be turned round like the ball on the bottom or the design in the middle. With the design in the middle, you will have a chance to use your blue books or your design books to draw a template idea. With that said, I would keep your design simple. If your confidence on the lathe, you don't feel as confident on the lathe, I would suggest that you create a simpler design. All right. If you are more confident, you can push the boundaries of what design you do, but you need to keep in mind that that design is carried over 3 additional pieces, not just the piece that you have on the lathe right now. All right. So again, when it comes to lathing, lay out all 4 sections of this prior to even putting it onto the lathe itself. With that said, if I want to make any additional marks, I can mark where those low points are in my design. So if I'm cutting a cove or I'm cutting a bead, I should lay that out on all 4 sides inside the area that is designated for that pattern. With that said, you can also shade in. If you can't see the lines, you can shade in each side of the square so it is more visible as it rotates around. All right? So that covers the lathing aspect. So once you have lathed your piece, all right, you're going to go over to the router table and cut the grooves, which allow us to have the top part of our skirt sit into it. All right, so we're going to move over to the router table now. If we look in our packet on that same page right here, this groove here is responsible for holding the supports, or what we call the skirts of our tables. All right. Now, the only reason why we can't do this on a table saw is we'll actually cut too far if we try to use the table saw. So we're going to use a router table to cut our groove here. So can everyone see the router bit here? All right, so this table is good to double check the distance between the blade and the fence prior to it, just to make sure that your cuts are accurate. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take my combination square, and I'm going to see if my line lines up. So that is our 3/4 line, and it's completely parallel to the blade. So the distance between the fence and the blade is 3/4. A simple way of doing it is to take our set block, this guy here, which has already been pre-cut to the exact measurement. So the distance from the fence is exactly 3/4, and the depth is 4 inches. Right? If I did not have this as an option, I can use my combination square to set all my measurements. So we're going to go over that real quick. So to set my stop block, which is this part here, I want it to be 4 inches from the bottom of the blade here. So I can take my ruler out of my combination square and set it so that the 4-inch mark, it's kind of hard to see, but the 4-inch mark is parallel with the blade here. Does everyone see that? All right. You don't have to do it that way because we have the set block, but let's just say the set block goes missing or someone cuts up the set block. This is the way you're going to do it if it is missing. All right? So that's how you'll use the combination square. With the set block, all I have to do is slide it up against my fence, and I'm going to loosen all these knobs in the back here. So these knobs lock down my fence and my stop block. I'm going to push my set block until it's touching the router bit. So it's going to stop right here. Then I bring in my stop block to make contact with my set block, tighten it down, and then that will help me create a perfect 4-inch groove cut. All right, now I have it set up so I'm going from the left side of the table. All right, you cannot do both of these cuts here going the same direction. All right, so in order to create this design, I have to approach it from this direction first. All right, and then I have to go from this direction to get the other side. All right, so why this is important is because when I'm approaching it from this side, the router bit is going in a clockwise fashion. So it's going the opposite direction it normally cuts. So when I'm pushing this in here, it's going to have a tendency to push my block off the fence, right? Because that's the force of motion. So to secure my block, what I would do is I would take my feather board and bring it up and then tighten it down so that I have pressure against this and the fence. All right. Now this is an aid. All right. Your hands still have to push against the fence as you feed it through, but it's there to make sure that you don't mess up. So the only reason why we don't set the featherboard with the set block is because your leg could be a different dimension. All right. So instead of using the set block for my featherboard, I'm going to take the block that I'm going to router, set it against the fence, and I'm going to push my featherboard against here. Then I can take my bar clamp and clamp it to the table. All right. Now the reason why the bar is not facing up is it actually blocks my working path, and it's actually a safety risk. So always have the bar clamp facing down towards the floor. Now, as you can see, if I zoom out, right, I have to be careful when I'm tightening this down, because if I move this, I won't have any pressure down on this side here. So I want to make sure that the featherboard is nicely snug against my block as I tighten it down. So watch your featherboard as you tighten it. All right. So I got it nice and tight. My stop block is set, and my workpiece fits nice between the featherboard. The next step is hook up suction. In the back of the stop block is a hollowed out back part which will accept your vacuum. And the reason why we need this is that as I'm routering, the chips are going to collect right here, which will prevent me from finishing my cut all the way. So instead of that happening, what I'll do, power up my vacuum, and I will start making my cut. Now one thing you need to be careful of when I'm coming from the left side of the table is I need to have adequate pressure at the front of the block. Even if I'm still having a featherboard here and I don't hold on to this, it still can kick out just a little bit, and that makes a difference. So as I'm pushing here, I need to have pressure right in the front as I feed my block in, all right? Now it's exactly the same for the right side, but the only difference is you actually have to loosen these bolts on every single one of these. So for the fence and the stop block, and gently, so you're not going to forcefully pull these out. You're going to gently slide it out. And then switch sides of the table. So I'll put this one over here. And slide this over here. Now I have to remove my featherboard because if I go from this direction with my set block, it's actually going to snag. A featherboard is designed kind of like our anti-kickback parts on the table saw. It's designed to let a piece go through, but not to snag. It's to snag it on the way back, just in case it kicks out. So what I would do is I'd flip this over and then reset it in this orientation. If I try to do it this way, what happens is it'll catch on the tooth, and you won't be able to proceed any further. Does that make sense? So flip your featherboard over, and then you'll reset from there. Same process. I would just take my set block, line up my groove, and cut through. Now, the one thing that's important is no matter what leg you're doing, the first groove I would always approach from the left, seeing it's the hardest one, and then go to the right. When I'm on the right side, so the groove I just cut, I want that groove facing out and towards me, the operator, so that I cut it exactly the same way on the opposite face. If you don't follow that method, you're going to cut a groove on the wrong side of your leg. Does that make sense? So the rule of thumb is, once I made that first cut, that groove should be facing out and towards me. It would be a really good idea to have all four legs ready to go instead of doing one leg at a time. So if you're building or lathing or, if you're lathing or doing a taper or cabriola, it doesn't matter. all 4 legs should be glued up, squared, and done prior to that. Does that make sense?